In the busy world of European politics, most leaders are loud and dramatic. They give exciting speeches and make big promises. They love cameras and crowds. But there was one leader who was completely different. She spoke quietly and calmly. She did not like being the center of attention. She wore simple clothes and had a plain haircut. Yet this woman became the most powerful person in Europe for 16 long years. Her name was Angela Merkel. She was born in 1954 in Germany when the country was split into two parts. She grew up in East Germany, the communist side, where people had very few freedoms. The government watched everyone closely. People could not travel freely or speak their minds. It was a hard place to live. Angela was not like other politicians. Before she entered politics, she was a scientist. She studied chemistry and worked in a laboratory. She loved numbers and facts. She believed in solving problems step by step, not with quick fixes. This scientific way of thinking would later help her lead Germany through many difficult times. When Angela first became Chancellor of Germany in 2005, many people did not expect much from her. She was quiet and seemed ordinary. She did not have the flashy style that people expected from powerful leaders. Some people even made fun of her simple appearance, but they were all wrong about Angela Merkel. During her time as Chancellor, she faced crisis after crisis. First came the global financial crash in 2008. Banks were failing everywhere. Countries were running out of money. People were losing their jobs. Many leaders panicked, but Angela stayed calm. She used her scientific mind to understand the problem and find solutions slowly and carefully. Then came the European debt crisis. Several European countries, especially Greece, could not pay their debts. The whole European Union was in danger of falling apart. Again, Angela took charge. She worked day and night to save Europe. She made tough decisions that were not always popular, but they worked. Europe survived because of her leadership. But the biggest test came in 2015. A terrible war was happening in Syria. Millions of people were forced to leave their homes. They were running away from bombs and violence. They needed somewhere safe to go. Many European countries said no to these refugees. They were afraid and did not want to help. Angela made a decision that shocked the world. She opened Germany's doors to more than 1 million refugees. She said 3 simple words that became famous around the world. "We can do this," she declared. Many people criticized her for this decision. They said it was dangerous and foolish. But Angela believed it was the right thing to do. She showed that even in difficult times, leaders should help people who are suffering. Throughout all these crises, Angela never lost her calm. She never shouted or got angry in public. She always spoke in a quiet, steady voice. She explained things clearly and honestly. The German people began to call her Mutti, which means mother in German. They saw her as someone who would always take care of them, no matter what happened. Angela was also the first woman to lead Germany. This was a big deal in a country that had always been led by men. But she never made a big fuss about being a woman. She just did her job as well as she could. She proved that women could be strong leaders without having to act like men. Other world leaders respected Angela greatly. When she spoke, everyone listened. American presidents asked for her advice. French presidents worked closely with her. Even difficult leaders like Vladimir Putin from Russia and Donald Trump from America had to take her seriously. She became the unofficial leader of the free world. Angela was different from other politicians in many ways. She did not care about being famous or popular. She cared about getting things done. She did not make big speeches full of empty promises. Instead, she worked quietly behind the scenes to solve real problems. She believed that actions were more important than words. Her leadership style was like her scientific background. She gathered all the facts first. She listened to experts. She thought carefully about all the options. Only then would she make a decision. This approach was sometimes slow, but it usually led to good results. People learned to trust her judgment. Angela also had to deal with many difficult situations with other countries. When Britain decided to leave the European Union, she tried to keep everyone together. When the coronavirus pandemic hit the world in 2020, she used her scientific knowledge to help Germany respond better than most other countries. She explained the virus and the safety measures in a way that people could understand. For 16 years, Angela Merkel was the steady hand that guided Germany and Europe through one crisis after another. She never gave up when things got tough. She never panicked when others were afraid. She just kept working day after day to make life better for millions of people. When she finally stepped down as Chancellor in 2021, the whole world paid attention. Leaders from every continent came to say goodbye and thank her. They knew they were saying farewell to one of the greatest leaders of their time. She had shown that you do not need to be loud or flashy to be powerful. You just need to be smart, calm, and caring. Angela Merkel proved that the best leaders are often the ones who seem most ordinary. She was not born into a powerful family. She did not go to fancy schools. She did not have special advantages. She was just a scientist from East Germany who believed in doing the right thing. But through hard work, intelligence, and determination, she became one of the most important people in the world. Her story shows us that anyone can make a difference if they are willing to work hard and never give up. She changed not just Germany but all of Europe and the world. She will be remembered as the quiet woman who proved that sometimes the most powerful leaders are the ones who speak the softest. On a cold day in July 1954, a baby girl was born in Hamburg, West Germany. Her name was Angela Dorothea Kastner. This little baby had no idea that she would one day become the most powerful woman in Europe. But her story began with something very unusual that would shape her entire life. When Angela was just 3 months old, her father made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. Horst Kastner was a Lutheran pastor, a religious man who believed in helping others. While millions of people were trying to escape from communist East Germany to the free West, he decided to do the opposite. He packed up his family and moved from West Germany to East Germany. This was like swimming against a rushing river. Every day, hundreds of East Germans risked their lives trying to reach the West. They climbed over walls, hid in car trunks, and dug tunnels under the ground. Many died trying to escape. But Pastor Kastner believed God was calling him to serve the people in East Germany who needed his help. The Kastner family settled in a small town called Templin, about 60 miles north of Berlin. It was a quiet place surrounded by forests and lakes. The town was beautiful, but life there was very different from the West. The communist government controlled everything. They decided what people could buy, where they could work, and even what they could say. Angela grew up in a world where everything was watched. The secret police called the Stasi had spies everywhere. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Teachers reported on students. Children were taught to report on their own parents if they said anything against the government. It was a world where people learned to be very careful about what they said and did. But the Kastner family was a little different from others in their town. Because Pastor Kastner was a church leader, they had some special privileges. They could sometimes get Western books and magazines. They had a car when most families did not. Angela even learned to speak Russian very well, which was unusual for a young girl. However, these privileges came with a price. The government watched the family very closely. Everything Pastor Kastner said in his sermons was monitored. Every visitor to their house was noted. Angela learned early that her family was always being observed. Growing up under this constant watching taught Angela important lessons. She learned to be very careful with her words. She discovered how to listen more than she spoke. She understood that sometimes the most important things were said in whispers, not shouts. These skills would later help her become a great leader. Angela was a very smart child. She loved mathematics because numbers never lied. In a world where the truth was often twisted by the government, math was pure and honest. 2 plus 2 always equaled 4, no matter what the politicians said. She also excelled in Russian language classes. While other students struggled with the difficult language, Angela found it easy and interesting. Her teachers quickly noticed how bright she was. Angela won prizes in mathematics competitions. She was always at the top of her class. But even as a young student, she was careful not to stand out too much. In East Germany, being too different or too successful could be dangerous. The government did not like people who seemed too independent or too smart. At home, Angela's parents taught her different values than what she heard at school. At school, she learned about communist heroes and the glorious socialist future. At home, her father taught her about Christian values like kindness, honesty, and helping others. Her mother, Herland, was a teacher who encouraged Angela to think for herself and ask questions. This created an interesting situation for young Angela. She had to learn to live in two different worlds at the same time. In public, she had to say what the government wanted to hear. In private, she could think her own thoughts and have her own opinions. This taught her to be very good at understanding what different people wanted to hear while keeping her true feelings to herself. Angela's childhood was not filled with the toys and freedoms that children in West Germany enjoyed. She could not travel to other countries. She could not watch Western television shows or listen to Western music. The government controlled what movies were shown and what books could be read. But Angela found ways to learn about the outside world anyway. Sometimes Western radio signals would reach across the border. Angela would listen carefully to these broadcasts, learning about life in the free world. She heard about places where people could speak their minds without fear. She learned about countries where people could choose their own jobs and travel wherever they wanted. These glimpses of freedom fascinated her. Despite the restrictions, Angela had a fairly happy childhood. She loved spending time in nature, walking through the forests around Templin. She enjoyed reading books, especially about science and mathematics. She was close to her younger siblings, Marcus and Irene, and helped take care of them. As Angela grew older, she began to understand more about the system she lived under. She saw how people were afraid to speak honestly. She noticed how talented people were sometimes held back because they did not have the right political connections. She observed how the government made promises it could not keep and told lies about the wonderful life in East Germany. But Angela was careful never to show her doubts publicly. She learned to play the game that everyone in East Germany had to play. She said the right things in school. She joined the youth organizations that all students had to join. She appeared to be a model socialist citizen. But inside, she was always watching, always learning, always thinking. The experience of growing up behind the Iron Curtain gave Angela special qualities that would later make her a great leader. She learned patience from having to wait for changes that seemed impossible. She learned to read between the lines of what people said. She discovered how to work within difficult systems to achieve her goals. Most importantly, she learned the value of freedom. Because she had lived without it, she understood how precious it was. She knew what it felt like to have your words watched and your movements controlled. This made her appreciate democracy and human rights in a way that people who had always been free sometimes could not. By the time Angela finished high school, she was ready to leave her small town and see more of the world, even if that world was still limited to East Germany. She had no idea that the walls around her country would soon come tumbling down, opening up possibilities she had never dared to dream of. When Angela was 19 years old, she left her small hometown of Templin to attend university. This was a big step for any young person, but it was especially exciting for someone who had grown up in the controlled world of East Germany. She was accepted to study physics at Leipzig University, one of the most respected schools in the country. Leipzig was much bigger and more exciting than Templin. It was an old city with beautiful buildings and a famous history. The university had been there for hundreds of years, and many great thinkers had studied within its walls. For Angela, who had always loved learning, this was like entering a magical kingdom of knowledge. Angela chose to study physics because she was fascinated by how the universe worked. She wanted to understand why things moved the way they did and how tiny particles combined to create everything around us. Physics was perfect for her logical mind. It required careful thinking, precise calculations, and patient observation. These were all things that Angela was naturally good at. In her physics classes, Angela learned that every problem could be solved if you approached it the right way. First, you had to gather all the facts. Then you had to form a theory about what might be happening. Next, you had to test your theory with experiments. If the experiments proved you wrong, you had to start over with a new theory. This scientific method of thinking would later help Angela solve many difficult political problems. Angela was an excellent student. While other students sometimes skipped classes or spent their time at parties, Angela was always in the library or the laboratory. She took careful notes during lectures and asked thoughtful questions. Her professors quickly noticed that she had a special talent for understanding complex ideas and explaining them clearly. The other students at the university were different from the people Angela had known in her small town. Many of them came from big cities and had more experience with the world. Some of them were brave enough to quietly criticize the communist government, though they had to be very careful about who they talked to. Angela listened to these conversations but rarely joined in. She was still learning to be cautious about expressing her own opinions. During her university years, Angela also learned about the wider world of science. She read about discoveries being made in Western countries and dreamed of someday being able to work with scientists from around the globe. But she knew that as long as East Germany remained cut off from the rest of the world, these dreams would have to wait. After finishing her studies at Leipzig, Angela decided to continue her education. She wanted to become a research scientist, which meant she needed to earn a doctorate degree. She moved to East Berlin to work at the Academy of Sciences, where she would spend the next several years studying a very specialized area of chemistry called quantum chemistry. Quantum chemistry sounds complicated, and it was. Angela was studying how the smallest particles in the universe behaved when they combined to form larger molecules. It was work that required incredible patience and attention to detail. She spent long hours in the laboratory, running experiments and analyzing results. Sometimes an experiment would take weeks to complete, and often the results were not what she expected, but Angela loved this work. In the laboratory, everything had to be precise and honest. You could not lie about your results or pretend that an experiment had worked when it had not. The laws of science were the same whether you lived in East Germany or West Germany or anywhere else in the world. This was very different from the political world she had grown up in, where the truth was often twisted to fit what the government wanted people to believe. During these years, Angela also got married to a fellow scientist named Ulrich Merkel. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who shared her love of learning and research. They had a simple wedding and settled into a comfortable life together. Angela kept his last name even after they later divorced, which was unusual but showed her practical nature. The name Merkel had become part of who she was. Angela and Ulrich lived in a small apartment in East Berlin. Their life was quiet and focused on their work. They did not have much money, but they did not need expensive things to be happy. They enjoyed reading, taking walks, and discussing scientific ideas. Angela was content with this simple life, though she sometimes wondered what opportunities might exist for her in the wider world. Working as a research scientist taught Angela many skills that would later make her a great political leader. She learned how to break down complex problems into smaller, manageable parts. She discovered that most problems had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. She understood that sometimes you had to try many different approaches before finding one that worked. The scientific method also taught Angela to be humble. In science, even the smartest people are often wrong about their first theories. The only way to find the truth is to keep testing your ideas and be willing to change your mind when the evidence shows you are wrong. This willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them would later help Angela adapt to the changing world of politics. Angela also learned the importance of working with other people. Science is rarely done by one person working alone. She had to collaborate with other researchers, share her findings, and build on the work that others had done before her. She discovered that she was good at bringing people together and helping them work toward common goals. Perhaps most importantly, Angela learned to think for the long term. Scientific research often takes years or even decades to produce useful results. You cannot rush discoveries or force breakthroughs to happen. Angela developed the patience to work steadily toward distant goals, even when progress seemed slow. This long-term thinking would later help her guide Germany through many difficult periods. By the late 1980s, Angela had established herself as a respected scientist. She had written her doctoral thesis and was working on important research projects. She seemed to have found her calling in life. She appeared content to spend her career in the laboratory, making quiet contributions to human knowledge. But the world around her was beginning to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The communist system that had controlled her entire life was starting to crack. New ideas about freedom and democracy were spreading, even in East Germany. Soon, Angela would have to choose between the safe, predictable world of science and the uncertain, exciting world of politics and public service. The year 1989 started like any other year for Angela. She was 34 years old and working quietly in her laboratory in East Berlin. Every morning, she would put on her white lab coat and focus on her scientific experiments. She studied tiny molecules and wrote careful reports about her findings. Her life was peaceful and predictable. She had no idea that this year would change everything, not just for her, but for all of Germany and the world. But across East Germany, something strange was happening. People were becoming braver about speaking their minds. They were starting to ask questions that had been forbidden for 40 years. Why could they not travel freely? Why could they not choose their own jobs? Why did the government control every part of their lives? These questions had always been there, whispered in private, but now people were beginning to say them out loud. Angela noticed these changes, but she was careful not to get involved. She had learned from childhood to keep her head down and focus on her work. Political movements were dangerous. People who spoke out against the government often disappeared or lost their jobs. Angela had too much to lose. She loved her research and wanted to keep doing the work that made her happy. But the changes kept growing bigger and stronger. In other communist countries, people were demanding freedom. In Poland, workers were forming unions that the government could not control. In Hungary, the leaders were talking about allowing more freedom. Even in the Soviet Union, the great communist superpower, a new leader named Mikhail Gorbachev was saying that things needed to change. All of these changes were making the East German government very nervous. For 40 years, they had kept their people locked inside the country. They had built a huge wall through the middle of Berlin to stop people from escaping to the west. They had guards with guns, who would shoot anyone trying to cross the border. But now, cracks were starting to show in their control. Throughout 1989, more and more East Germans began protesting in the streets. At first, there were just a few brave people. Then hundreds joined them, then thousands. The protesters marched through cities carrying candles and singing songs. They chanted, "We are the people," and demanded the right to travel freely and speak their minds. Angela watched these protests with amazement and worry. Part of her admired the courage of the protesters. They were risking everything for freedom. But another part of her was afraid. She had seen what happened to people who challenged the government. She did not want to lose the life she had built for herself. The protests kept growing larger and larger. In October 1989, hundreds of thousands of people marched in Leipzig, one of East Germany's biggest cities. The government did not know what to do. They had always used force to stop protests before, but there were too many people now. If they tried to arrest everyone, the whole country might explode in revolution. Then came the night that changed everything. On November 9, 1989, an East German government official made a terrible mistake. During a press conference on television, he accidentally announced that the border between East and West Berlin would be opened immediately. He did not mean to say this, but once the words were spoken on live television, thousands of people heard them. Within hours, crowds of East Berliners rushed to the Berlin Wall. They demanded that the guards let them through to West Berlin. The guards were confused and scared. They had not received any official orders to open the border. But with thousands of angry people pushing against the gates, they finally gave up and opened the crossing points. Angela was at home that evening when she heard the news on the radio. Like millions of other East Germans, she could hardly believe what she was hearing. The Berlin Wall, which had divided her country for 28 years, was being torn down by ordinary people with hammers and pickaxes. Families who had been separated for decades were hugging each other and crying with joy. For Angela, this moment was both exciting and terrifying. She had spent her entire life learning to live within the rules of the communist system. She had found ways to be successful and happy even with all the restrictions. Now suddenly all those rules were disappearing. Everything she had known was changing, and she did not know what would come next. Unlike many of her fellow East Germans who rushed to the wall to celebrate, Angela stayed home that first night. She was a careful person who liked to think before acting. She needed time to understand what these changes would mean for her life and her country. The scientist in her wanted to gather all the facts before making any decisions. In the days and weeks that followed, East Germany began to fall apart as a country. The communist government lost all power. New political groups started forming, each with different ideas about what should happen next. Some wanted East Germany to become a free country, but remain separate from West Germany. Others wanted the two parts of Germany to become one nation again. Angela watched all of this happening with great interest. She began to see that this was not just about tearing down a wall or changing governments. This was about creating a completely new society. And for the first time in her life, she realized that ordinary people like herself could help shape what that new society would look like. A few weeks after the wall fell, Angela heard about a new political group called Democratic Awakening. This group was trying to build a peaceful, democratic East Germany. They believed in freedom and human rights, but they also wanted to preserve some of the good things from the old system, like free health care and education. Angela decided to attend one of their meetings. It was held in a small room in a church basement. There were only about 20 people there, most of them ordinary citizens like herself who had never been involved in politics before. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, and workers who wanted to help build a better future. During the meeting, the group was looking for someone who could speak to newspapers and television reporters about their ideas. They needed someone who was smart, well-educated, and could explain complex ideas in simple language. When they asked if anyone would volunteer for this job, Angela surprised herself by raising her hand. This simple gesture, raising her hand in a church basement, was the moment that Angela Merkel entered politics. She had no idea that this decision would lead her to become the most powerful woman in Europe. She just wanted to help her country during this time of great change. But sometimes, the biggest journeys begin with the smallest steps. When Angela first agreed to be the spokesperson for Democratic Awakening, she had no idea what she was getting herself into. Politics was completely different from science. In the laboratory, experiments either worked or they did not. Facts were facts. But in politics, Angela quickly learned the truth could be twisted and shaped like clay in a potter's hands. Her new job meant talking to reporters and explaining her party's ideas on television and radio. This was scary for someone who had spent her whole life being careful about what she said in public. But Angela discovered that her scientific training actually helped her. She spoke clearly and calmly. She stuck to facts instead of making emotional speeches. People began to notice this young woman who seemed so different from other politicians. The political situation in East Germany was changing every day. The old communist government had completely collapsed. New parties were forming and disappearing just as quickly. Everyone was trying to figure out what would happen next. Would East Germany become an independent democratic country? Would it join with West Germany? Nobody knew for sure. During this confusing time, Angela met the man who would change her life forever. His name was Helmut Kohl, and he was the Chancellor of West Germany. Kohl was a big, powerful man who loved politics the way some people love sports. He was loud and friendly, completely different from the quiet, careful Angela. But when he met her, something special happened. Kohl immediately saw that Angela was very smart and could help him achieve his biggest dream. He wanted to reunite East and West Germany into one country again. This would be incredibly difficult and expensive, but Kohl believed it was the right thing to do. He also knew that having an East German woman on his side would help convince people that reunification was good for everyone. Angela's small political party, Democratic Awakening, was struggling to survive. It did not have much money or many supporters, but Kohl offered to help by merging the party with his own much larger party, the Christian Democratic Union, or CDU. This was a huge opportunity for Angela, but it also meant giving up some of her independence. After much thought, Angela decided to join the CDU. It was a smart political move, but it was also risky. She was now a very small fish in a very big pond. The CDU had been around for decades and was full of experienced politicians who knew all the tricks of the game. Angela was just a beginner who had been in politics for less than a year. But Cole took Angela under his wing like a protective father. He began calling her his discovery and gave her important jobs to do. When Germany officially reunited in October 1990, Cole made sure that Angela had a role in the new government. She became a member of parliament and was given the job of Minister for Women and Youth. This was an important position, but many people saw it as a job for someone who was not quite ready for the really big roles. Angela did not mind. She knew she had a lot to learn, and she was willing to start at the bottom and work her way up. She approached her new job the same way she had approached her scientific research, with careful preparation and attention to detail. As Minister for Women and Youth, Angela worked hard to help young people find jobs and opportunities in the new Germany. The reunification had been more difficult than anyone expected. Many East German factories had closed down, leaving thousands of people without work. Young people especially were struggling to find their place in this new world. Angela traveled all over the former East Germany, meeting with young people and listening to their problems. She was good at this because she understood what they were going through. She had lived through the same changes they were experiencing. She knew what it felt like to have your whole world turned upside down. Cole was impressed with how well Angela did her job. In 1994, he promoted her to become Minister for the Environment. This was a much more important position that put her in charge of protecting Germany's air, water, and forests. Environmental protection was becoming a big issue in Germany, and Angela threw herself into the work with her usual thoroughness. As Environment Minister, Angela had to deal with some very difficult problems. The old East German factories had polluted the air and water terribly. Cleaning up this mess would cost billions of dollars and take many years. Angela approached these problems like a scientist, gathering data and finding practical solutions step by step. But Angela was learning that being a politician meant more than just doing good work. She also had to build relationships with other politicians and learn to navigate the complicated world of party politics. The CDU was full of ambitious men who had been waiting years for their chance to move up. Many of them resented this newcomer from East Germany who seemed to be advancing so quickly. Angela handled this jealousy carefully. She never acted like she thought she was better than anyone else. She listened more than she spoke. She worked harder than most of her colleagues and never complained about difficult assignments. Slowly, she began to earn the respect of even those who had initially doubted her. Cole continued to mentor Angela and teach her the ways of politics. He showed her how to make deals with other parties, how to handle difficult reporters, and how to survive in the rough world of German politics. He also taught her something very important about power. Real power, he told her, came not from making grand speeches or getting attention in the newspapers. Real power came from being the person that others trusted to get things done. Angela absorbed these lessons carefully. She watched how Cole operated, how he built coalitions and convinced people to support his ideas. She learned when to compromise and when to stand firm. Most importantly, she learned patience. Politics, she discovered, was a long game where the biggest victories often took years to achieve. By the late 1990s, Angela had become one of the most respected politicians in the CDU. She had proven that she could handle big responsibilities and deliver results. Cole began to hint that she might have an even bigger future ahead of her. Some people even started talking about her as a possible candidate for chancellor someday, though most thought that was still many years away. Angela just kept working, building her reputation one success at a time. She knew that she was still learning and that there was much more she needed to understand about leadership and politics. But she also knew that she had found her calling. Politics gave her a chance to help millions of people and shape the future of her country. For someone who had grown up in a system where ordinary people had no voice, this was an incredible opportunity that she did not intend to waste. On November 22, 2005, Angela Merkel stood in the German Parliament building and raised her right hand. She was taking an oath to become the 8th Chancellor of Germany and the first woman ever to hold this powerful position. As she spoke the words of the oath, she must have thought about how far she had traveled from that small laboratory in East Berlin, where she once studied molecules and dreamed of scientific discoveries. The journey to this moment had been long and sometimes painful. Angela had learned that politics was much more brutal than science. In science, if your theory was wrong, you simply tried a new approach. But in politics, when things went wrong, real people suffered. Families lost their jobs. Countries could fall apart. The decisions she would make as chancellor would affect the lives of 80 million Germans and hundreds of millions more people across Europe. Angela became chancellor at a time when Germany was facing serious problems. The economy was struggling and millions of people could not find work. Many businesses were moving their factories to other countries where workers cost less money. Young people were leaving Germany to find better opportunities elsewhere. The country that had once been the economic powerhouse of Europe was starting to look weak and uncertain. But Angela was not afraid of these challenges. Her scientific training had taught her that every problem had a solution if you were willing to work hard enough to find it. She assembled a team of smart advisors and began studying Germany's problems the same way she had once studied chemical reactions in her laboratory. Her first major test came much sooner than anyone expected. In 2008, banks in America started failing because they had made too many bad loans to people who could not pay them back. This crisis quickly spread around the world like a dangerous disease. Banks in Europe also started having problems. Companies could not get the money they needed to operate. People lost their jobs and their homes. Many world leaders panicked when the financial crisis hit. They made quick decisions without thinking carefully about the consequences. Some spent huge amounts of government money trying to fix problems immediately. Others ignored the crisis and hoped it would go away by itself. Angela took a different approach. She used her scientific mind to understand exactly what was happening before she acted. She met with economists and banking experts. She studied reports and data. She asked difficult questions and demanded honest answers. Only after she understood the problem completely did she decide what to do. Angela's solution was careful and measured. Germany would help its banks, but only if they agreed to be more responsible in the future. The government would create jobs, but only for projects that would help the country in the long term. She refused to spend money just to make people feel better temporarily. Many people criticized Angela for moving too slowly during the crisis. They said she should do more to help immediately. But Angela believed that quick fixes often created bigger problems later. She was willing to accept criticism if it meant making better decisions for Germany's future. Her patient approach worked. While other countries struggled for years with the effects of the financial crisis, Germany recovered faster and stronger than almost anyone else. German companies became more competitive. Unemployment fell to its lowest level in decades. The German economy became the strongest in Europe, but Angela's biggest test was still coming. In 2010, Greece, a member of the European Union, ran out of money and could not pay its debts. This created a new crisis that threatened to destroy the European Union itself. If Greece went bankrupt, it might have to leave the European Union. Other weak countries like Spain, Portugal, and Italy might follow. The dream of a united Europe could collapse. Angela found herself at the center of this crisis. Germany was the richest and most powerful country in Europe, which meant that other countries looked to her for leadership. But helping Greece would cost German taxpayers billions of dollars. Many Germans asked why they should pay for Greece's mistakes. Angela had to make one of the most difficult decisions of her career. She could let Greece fail and protect German money, or she could help Greece and risk making German voters angry. After much thought, she decided that saving the European Union was more important than short-term popularity. But Angela was not going to give Greece money without demanding changes. She insisted that Greece cut its government spending and reform its economy. This meant that Greek workers would have to accept lower wages and fewer benefits. Greek retirees would get smaller pensions. These demands made Angela very unpopular in Greece, where people called her cruel and heartless. Angela did not enjoy being hated, but she believed she was doing the right thing. Her scientific training had taught her that problems could not be solved by wishful thinking. If Greece wanted help, it had to be willing to make difficult changes. She was trying to save Greece from itself, even if Greek people did not understand that at the time. Her approach to the Greek crisis established Angela as the most powerful leader in Europe. When she spoke, other European leaders listened. When she made demands, other countries had to take them seriously. She had become what many people called the real president of Europe, even though no such position officially existed. Angela's leadership style was very different from most other world leaders. She did not give inspiring speeches or make grand promises. She did not seek attention or try to become famous. Instead, she worked quietly behind the scenes, studying problems carefully and finding practical solutions. Other world leaders learned to respect Angela's methods, even if they sometimes found her frustrating. American presidents called her for advice. French leaders worked closely with her on European problems. Even difficult leaders like Vladimir Putin from Russia had to take her seriously. By the end of her first decade as chancellor, Angela had transformed Germany from a struggling country into the leader of Europe. She had shown that careful, scientific thinking could solve even the most complicated political problems. But her greatest challenges were still ahead of her, and they would test not just her intelligence, but her courage and her humanity as well. Being the most powerful woman in the world was not as glamorous as people might think. Angela discovered that every decision she made was examined and criticized by millions of people. Every word she spoke was analyzed for hidden meanings. Every outfit she wore was discussed in newspapers. She had wanted to serve her country, but she had not expected that her entire life would become public property. As a woman in politics, Angela faced challenges that male leaders never had to worry about. Critics commented on her appearance instead of her policies. They called her boring because she did not wear fashionable clothes or expensive jewelry. They questioned whether a woman could be strong enough to lead during difficult times. Some people even criticized her for not having children, as if this somehow made her less qualified to lead a nation. Angela learned to handle these attacks by ignoring them completely. She refused to change her simple style or pretend to be someone she was not. She wore the same type of colorful blazers she had always worn. She kept her practical haircut. She focused on doing her job well and let her results speak for themselves. Gradually, people stopped talking about how she looked and started paying attention to what she accomplished. But the personal attacks were nothing compared to the political storms that lay ahead. In 2015, Angela faced the biggest crisis of her career. A terrible war was raging in Syria, and millions of people were fleeing their homes to escape the violence. These refugees were walking across Europe, looking for somewhere safe to live. They carried their children in their arms and everything they owned in small bags. Most European countries did not want to accept these refugees. They were afraid that too many foreigners would change their cultures and take jobs away from their own citizens. They built fences along their borders and turned away desperate families. But as Angela watched the news reports of children drowning in the Mediterranean Sea and families sleeping in train stations, she felt that Europe was abandoning its most basic values. Then came the moment that would define Angela's legacy forever. On August 31, 2015, she announced that Germany would accept all Syrian refugees who reached its borders. She said 3 simple words that became famous around the world: "We can do this." In just a few months, more than 1 million refugees entered Germany. Angela's decision shocked the world. Some people praised her as a humanitarian hero who was saving innocent lives. But many others, including people in her own country, were furious. They said she was being reckless and naive. They worried that Germany could not handle so many new people. They feared that terrorists might sneak in among the genuine refugees. The criticism grew even louder when some terrible things happened. On New Year's Eve 2015, groups of men sexually attacked women in several German cities. Some of these attackers were refugees, and this made many Germans even more angry about Angela's refugee policy. Then, in 2016, a refugee drove a truck into a Christmas market in Berlin, killing 12 people and injuring many more. These attacks were exactly what Angela's critics had warned about. They said her open-door policy had made Germany less safe. Her approval ratings dropped dramatically. For the first time in her career, Angela was no longer the most popular politician in Germany. Some people in her own party began to question whether she should continue as chancellor. Angela was heartbroken by these attacks and the suffering they caused, but she refused to change her mind about helping refugees. She believed that closing Germany's doors would mean abandoning people who desperately needed help. She also knew that giving in to fear would mean that the terrorists had won. Around the same time, Angela had to deal with another major challenge. Britain had voted to leave the European Union in a referendum called Brexit. This was a disaster for European unity. If one of the biggest and most important countries could leave the EU, other countries might follow. The whole European project that had brought peace and prosperity to the continent for decades was in danger. Angela had to work frantically to keep the European Union together. She met with leaders from every European country, trying to convince them that staying united was better than breaking apart. She had to balance being tough with Britain to discourage other countries from leaving, while also trying to maintain friendly relationships that would help trade and cooperation continue. At the same time, Angela was dealing with a new American president who made her job much more difficult. Donald Trump was completely different from the American leaders she had worked with before. He was unpredictable and often rude. He criticized Germany publicly and threatened to reduce American support for European security. He seemed to prefer working with authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin rather than democratic allies like Angela. Angela had to learn how to handle Trump's unusual style. She could not rely on the normal diplomatic relationships that had worked with previous American presidents. Instead, she had to be patient and persistent, trying to maintain the friendship between Germany and America despite Trump's hostility. The stress of dealing with so many crises at once began to show on Angela. News cameras caught her hands shaking during public ceremonies. She looked tired and older. People started to wonder if the job was becoming too much for her. Some of her closest advisors worried about her health and suggested that she might want to consider stepping down. But Angela was not ready to quit. She had worked too hard and come too far to give up when her country needed her most. She knew that leadership sometimes meant making unpopular decisions and accepting criticism. She had learned this lesson first as a scientist, where the truth was sometimes uncomfortable, and now as a politician, where doing the right thing was not always the popular thing. The refugee crisis and its aftermath taught Angela that even the most powerful leaders cannot control everything. Sometimes bad things happen despite your best efforts. Sometimes people blame you for problems you did not create. But true leadership means accepting responsibility anyway and continuing to work for what you believe is right, even when the whole world seems to be against you. By 2018, Angela Merkel had been Chancellor of Germany for 13 years. She had survived more crises than most leaders face in a lifetime. She had guided her country through financial disasters, refugee emergencies, and international conflicts. But even the strongest leaders eventually reached their limits, and Angela was beginning to feel the weight of all those years in power. The signs were becoming impossible to ignore. During official ceremonies, television cameras caught her hands shaking uncontrollably. She tried to hide it by holding her hands together or sitting down quickly, but people noticed. Newspapers began writing stories about her health. Political opponents suggested that she was too weak to continue leading. Angela knew that speculation about her condition was becoming a distraction from the important work of governing. More troubling than her physical symptoms was the changing political landscape around her. The Alternative for Germany party, known as the AfD, had grown from a small protest movement into a major political force. They opposed almost everything Angela stood for, especially her refugee policies. For the first time since World War II, a far-right party had seats in the German parliament. This was a direct result of the anger many Germans felt about the refugee crisis. Angela realized that her presence as chancellor was actually helping the AfD gain support. They used her as a symbol of everything they claimed was wrong with Germany. Every time she defended her refugee policy, they gained more followers. Every time she spoke about European unity, they attracted more people who wanted Germany to focus only on itself. After much careful thought, Angela made one of the hardest decisions of her life. In October 2018, she announced that she would not run for re-election as leader of her party, the CDU. This meant that she was beginning the process of stepping down as chancellor, though she would not leave office immediately. She wanted to manage her departure carefully to avoid creating chaos in German politics. Angela's announcement surprised many people, but it also showed her wisdom as a leader. She understood that knowing when to leave was just as important as knowing how to lead. Too many politicians stayed in power too long and damaged their countries by refusing to step aside. Angela did not want to make that mistake. The process of choosing her successor took much longer than anyone expected. Several politicians wanted to take her place, but none of them had her experience or her ability to hold different groups together. The CDU struggled to find someone who could appeal to both conservative and moderate voters. Elections were held within the party, but the results were disappointing. The party seemed lost without Angela's steady leadership. During this transition period, Angela faced her greatest challenge yet. In early 2020, a new disease called COVID-19 began spreading around the world. This virus was extremely dangerous, especially for older people and those with health problems. Countries had to choose between protecting public health and keeping their economies running. It was exactly the kind of complex crisis that Angela had become expert at handling. Angela's scientific background proved invaluable during the pandemic. Unlike many other world leaders, she understood how viruses spread and what measures were needed to stop them. She could read medical research papers and understand what the experts were telling her. When she spoke to the German people about the virus, she explained things clearly and honestly, without hiding the difficult truths. Germany's response to COVID-19 was one of the most successful in the world. The country acted quickly to test people for the virus and trace who they had been in contact with. Hospitals prepared for the worst and were ready when sick patients arrived. The government provided financial support for businesses and workers who lost income because of lockdowns. While other countries struggled with chaos and confusion, Germany's response was organized and effective. Angela's handling of the pandemic reminded people why they had trusted her for so many years. Her calm, scientific approach was exactly what Germany needed during a frightening and uncertain time. Her approval ratings went back up, and some people even suggested that she should change her mind about stepping down. But Angela had made her decision and would not change it. She knew that leaders who stayed too long often hurt their countries and their own legacies. She wanted to leave while people still respected her and while Germany was in good condition. She had learned from watching other politicians who had been forced out in embarrassing circumstances. The process of finding a new chancellor became even more complicated when the 2021 elections produced a very close result. No single party won enough votes to govern alone, which meant that several parties had to work together to form a government. These negotiations took many weeks, during which Angela continued to serve as chancellor and handle Germany's day-to-day business. Finally, in December 2021, a new government was formed led by Olaf Scholz from the Social Democratic Party. Angela officially stepped down as chancellor on December 8, 2021, after 16 years in office. Her farewell ceremony was simple and dignified, just like her leadership style had been. During her final weeks in office, Angela worked carefully to ensure a smooth transition. She met with Scholz many times to brief him on important issues and ongoing problems. She introduced him to other world leaders and helped him understand the complex relationships between different countries. She wanted Germany to remain stable and respected even after she was gone. Angela also spent time reflecting on her incredible journey from a scientist in East Germany to the most powerful woman in the world. She had accomplished things that would have been impossible to imagine when she first raised her hand in that church basement meeting in 1989. She had shown that quiet competence could be more powerful than loud rhetoric, and that doing the right thing was more important than being popular. As she prepared to return to private life, Angela could be proud of what she had achieved. She had kept Germany prosperous and democratic during some of the most difficult times in recent history. She had held Europe together when it seemed ready to fall apart. Most importantly, she had shown the world that leadership was about service, not glory, and that the best politicians were those who cared more about their people than about themselves. When Angela Merkel walked out of the Chancellor's office for the last time in December 2021, she left behind a Germany that was completely different from the one she had found 16 years earlier. She also left behind a world that had been shaped by her steady hand and scientific mind. But perhaps most importantly, she left behind a new understanding of what leadership could look like in the modern world. The woman who had once been dismissed as boring and unremarkable had quietly revolutionized politics. She had shown that you did not need to be loud or flashy to be powerful. You did not need to make grand speeches or dramatic gestures to change the world. Sometimes the most important work was done in quiet meeting rooms, through careful negotiation and patient problem-solving. Angela returned to private life in a small apartment in Berlin, not far from where she had once worked as a scientist. She avoided the spotlight and rarely gave interviews. She did not write a tell-all book or give expensive speeches like many former leaders. Instead, she seemed content to read, take walks, and enjoy the simple pleasures that had been impossible during her years in power. But even in retirement, people around the world continued to talk about her remarkable legacy. In Germany, Angela's impact was everywhere. The country she left behind was the strongest economy in Europe and one of the most respected nations in the world. German companies were leaders in technology and manufacturing. German universities attracted students from around the globe. The German political system, despite some challenges, remained stable and democratic. Most importantly, Germany had become a country that other nations looked to for leadership and guidance. Angela had also transformed how the world saw Germany. When she became chancellor, many people still thought of Germany as the country that had started 2 world wars and committed terrible crimes against humanity. By the time she left office, Germany was seen as a force for peace, democracy, and human rights. Angela had helped her country complete its journey from aggressor to protector, from destroyer to builder. Her refugee policy, despite all the criticism it had generated, had ultimately shown the world what moral leadership looked like. By opening Germany's doors to more than 1 million desperate people, Angela had demonstrated that wealthy nations had a responsibility to help those in need. Many of the refugees she had welcomed were now contributing to German society as workers, students, and citizens. Her decision had saved countless lives and showed that doing the right thing was sometimes more important than doing the popular thing. Angela's influence on the European Union was equally profound. When she became chancellor, Europe was struggling with economic problems and growing divisions between member countries. By the time she left office, despite the loss of Britain and ongoing challenges, the EU was stronger and more united than many people had thought possible. Angela had been the glue that held Europe together during its darkest moments. Her leadership during the financial crisis had saved not just Germany but the entire European economy. Her insistence on careful, measured responses rather than panic had prevented a collapse that could have thrown millions of people out of work and destroyed decades of progress toward European unity. Her approach had not always been popular, especially in countries like Greece that had to make painful reforms, but it had worked. The COVID-19 pandemic had been Angela's final test as a leader, and she had passed it brilliantly. Germany's response to the virus had been one of the most successful in the world, saving thousands of lives and keeping the economy relatively stable. Her scientific background and clear communication had helped Germans understand what needed to be done and why. Even her critics had to admit that she had handled the crisis with skill and wisdom. But Angela's most important legacy might be what she had shown about women in leadership. When she first became chancellor, there were very few women leading major countries anywhere in the world. By the time she stepped down, women were presidents and prime ministers in dozens of nations. Angela had proven that women could be just as effective as men in the highest offices, and often brought different strengths to leadership. She had never made a big deal about being a woman or claimed that her gender made her special. Instead, she had simply done her job as well as she could and let her results speak for themselves. Her success had opened doors for countless other women who wanted to serve in government or lead businesses and organizations. Girls growing up around the world could now imagine themselves in positions of power because Angela had shown them it was possible. Angela's leadership style had also influenced how other politicians approached their jobs. Her emphasis on facts over emotion, on careful analysis over quick reactions, had shown that there was an alternative to the angry, divisive politics that had become common in many countries. She had proven that voters would support leaders who were competent and honest, even if they were not exciting or entertaining. World leaders who had worked with Angela continued to seek her advice even after she left office. They had learned to trust her judgment and value her perspective. She had become a symbol of stability and wisdom in a world that often seemed chaotic and unpredictable. Even her opponents respected her intelligence and integrity. Perhaps most remarkably, Angela had managed to serve for 16 years without any major scandals or ethical problems. In an age when many politicians were brought down by corruption, lies, or personal failures, she had maintained her reputation for honesty and competence throughout her career. She had shown that it was possible to be powerful without being corrupt, to be successful without compromising your values. As historians began to assess Angela's place in history, many compared her to the greatest leaders of the past century. Like Franklin Roosevelt, she had guided her country through multiple crises. Like Nelson Mandela, she had helped heal old wounds and bring people together. Like Margaret Thatcher, she had proven that women could be strong and effective leaders. But Angela was unique in her own way, bringing a scientific mind and moral compass to the rough world of politics. The little girl who had grown up behind the Iron Curtain, who had learned to be careful with her words, and patient with change, had become one of the most influential people of her time. She had shown that sometimes the most powerful revolutions happen quietly, led by people who care more about results than recognition. Angela Merkel had changed the world not through force or drama, but through steady, principled leadership that put service above self and substance above style.